I'm going to ask just a few questions and for them to respond, and possibly if there's time at the end, if you have any additional questions, you can put them on the spot as well. So, Dr. Schauer, how do the Common Core standards better prepare students for success in college, career, and life? And how is student success related to economic development?
First of all, thank you all for being here and sticking it out till 11:15. That's pretty good. So we must be doing something good today. I think, in the session where I was talking about this topic, it was mainly thinking about not reforming the system, but transforming the system. So as we think about Common Core, it's not taking what we currently have and making it a little bit better. And pretty much I've been in the field for 35 years. And that's what we've been doing, taking the structures that we have, trying to make them more efficient, trying to make sure that our students are learning at greater paces, everything about that system to make it better than it was. Now what we're talking about is really replacing the system with something much different. And so what Common Core is it's integrated learning, and it's the application of learning to real-world problems. And that's what we're doing in our schools, and that's what the system is changing to. The benefits to the business community is that what our business leaders have been saying for a really long time is we need employees who are not just compliant. We have a lot of kids who learn to follow the rules and they go along with what we ask them to do. They learn the steps to solving the math problem. We don't need that anymore. What we need are workers who are self-starters, who can initiate finding a solution to a problem and have confidence that they can reach that solution, and by the way, know how to work really well with a team of people and collaborate and really move toward viable solutions. The advantage to our economy is we have more successful businesses, and it creates a much healthier and prosperous economy for all. So that's what this is all about.
And Mrs. Carlson, I know ABEC has been working with business and education leaders to advance college career readiness for all students. Based on what you heard from Dr. Schauer and based on the work that you have done, what thoughts would you like to share with today's group as it relates to ABEC's work and ways for today's attendees to become engaged?
Thank you very much. It's great to be in the city of Tempe, where I was born and raised. Yes, my softball coach of my kids is sitting right over here. Well, let me just add a little bit to what Dave just said. ABEC has a conference coming up. You'll see the notice on the back table if you'd like to pick one up. But one of the guests that's going to be in this conference is the talent officer for Banner Healthcare. Banner Healthcare, in this time of unemployment, where we have people looking for jobs, has got 1,400 jobs open across the state they could fill today if they could find the candidates. They just went to a hiring fair looking for 1,200 employees, could hire 800 because they couldn't find more employees. Why? When we talked about this mismatch, it's because today's employer needs, as Dave just said, not just students that come out and know their ABCs and their read, write, and arithmetic. They need to know how to think. They need to know how to analyze. They need to know how to come up with solutions. They need to be able to articulate solutions and defend their solutions to others. So for ABEC, that represents both business and education, that is a challenge. When we have got students coming out of the system now that reflect the approach to teaching that has occurred in terms of time tests and rote memorization. Now it's shifting to looking at facts and being able to talk about them. The other big challenge for all of our state is that the Common Core expectations are really grounded in language, being able to think and articulate. And we've got a state that's growing in poverty and growing in students who are just learning the language. And so when we think about, plus we've got a state that is cutting and cutting and cutting in school funding. And anybody who's been in the classroom who's tried to help a child know how to read or talk knows that you don't do it in a student-teacher ratio of 1 to 15. You do it in a student-teacher ratio of 1 to 2. And that costs money. So those are the things that I would have to say that have really fired up ABEC around this issue of Common Core. The fact of the matter is we have got an assessment that's going to occur next year. It'll be the first pass at the assessment, whatever it may be. It will either be PARC or it'll be named AIMS and be something else. But whatever that's going to be, it's going to occur next year. And we're going to have reporters who are going to call districts and say, how did you do? And you're going to see a headline in your community that's going to say, this is what the results are. So unless the business community is part of the solution, and unless they're well educated around what Common Core means and what these higher expectations mean, they will not understand that we are in this great transition toward actually the workforce that the business community has been calling for the past decade. So that's been a number of ways that business can be involved in helping with the solution. One of ABEC's work over the next year will be to be in communities to do the kinds of capacity building that we've talked about, helping business community understand where we are, what needs to occur, providing a venue for training for business community to come in and help third graders read on grade level. Children read on grade level by third grade. But the kinds of things that the business community thinks they ought to be engaged in, they just don't know how to do it. We want to be able to provide a pathway and some capacity building to make that happen.
Thank you. And you touched on a point about PARC assessments and test scores and how they're going to be publicized and how they currently are and compared. And Mrs. Bush, you attended the presentation from Dr. Garcia and learned about his research. What are 1 or 2 points from that presentation would you like for our business leaders, our education leaders to take away in understanding how parents choose?
First of all, children aren't cups of coffee. And David Garcia makes a huge point of that. I think one of the biggest points that I would want everyone to take away is that it's really about our children. It's not about the politics of it. It's not about whether you're Republican or Democrat or whether you're in support of Common Core or not Common Core or about the funding. That all matters. But really what it's about is the relationships we have with our families and our kids and what we're doing for kids to engage them in meaningful, successful learning opportunities. You know, we all, 35 years, I'm almost in 40 years of my career, and I will tell you this, I've seen it all. Common Core, most of us believe, is going to be great for kids because it is going to create the type of workforce that our employers and our business community have said that we need. But I will tell you in the end that what parents want and what children want is they want to belong to a community that values their learning, that values them as individuals, and that we do whatever it takes, all of us sitting in this room, all of us sitting at the Capitol, that all of us collectively do whatever it takes to make sure that every one of our children can access those 1,200 jobs with Banner Desert or whatever company that we're talking about. And when I'm going to quote Tracy Benson in Arizona School Board's Journal, she said, we have to win the hearts and minds of our families and our students. That's what our families want. We have to listen to them, and we have to be tirelessly searching for whatever it's going to take to make every child succeed. I don't want any one of my kids leaving my district. I will go to the ends of the earth to make sure that we find the teacher, the school, the principal that will help my children be successful. And the charter schools want the same thing. And the private schools want the same thing. And what we need now is our community and our business partners and our legislators wanting that same thing. So, David, that was a long-winded way of saying, but thank you for your inspiration to me.
Thank you. And you know, Mr. McManus, Mrs. Bush touched on about relationships, about community building, and Valley Interfaith Project does a lot of work in a number of areas, including education. Can you tell us about how and why you work in the education area and how others might engage with you?
Sure. So we think that a lot of these issues, these concerns, whether it be education or healthcare or neighborhood safety, you need to have communities engaged in the issue, first of all. And in particular, you need to have constituent leaders who can work with others, who can train and teach others, and who, when needed, can mobilize a constituency around these concerns. The way that Valley Interfaith Project organizes, we have 40 member institutions, mostly congregations, some neighborhood schools, some nonprofits, that come together and work on issues that are affecting families in those institutions. One of the ways that we do that is something called a Civic Academy strategy. In a Civic Academy strategy, we work with local parents in a school or teachers or community members, members of congregations, training and teaching them around an issue, helping kind of guide them through what we call research actions, where they can understand a complex problem, turn it into a specific tangible issue. And then they go back into their institutions and teach it. So a successful Civic Academy has 3 parts. One part is when they assemble people. This could be a meeting in a congregation or a school, 40, 50, 100 people. Creating a space for those attendees to share their concerns, their stories, how they're affected by the issue. What are your concerns about your local school? How have education cuts affected, what you've seen at the district level, or what are your family's concerns about safety in this neighborhood? But to create that space for people to share their stories. So that's one part. The second thing in a Civic Academy is that team of leaders then creates a context for those stories. And that could be a teaching piece, a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes it's engaging a guest. But to help people understand that it's more than just that specific, tangible, right in front of your face problem that they're experiencing, there's a broader context for it. So what they've seen in terms of class sizes is a result of cuts to district budgets, which are a result of state policy, which might be a result of taxation, but that there is a broader context for why all of a sudden their kid's class has 30 kids in it. Or for why the neighborhood is less safe, or why more houses are being foreclosed on. There's a context for the community issue that's affecting them. The third part of a Civic Academy is a call to action. An action step that people can take if they want to connect their story and their concern into some kind of way of doing something about it. So for example, our education leaders have been teaching an education Civic Academy in their congregations on the state budget, about school funding, how it works, and then getting new people, new parents, new community members engaged in a way where they're contacting their legislators, going down to the Capitol for meetings, arranging house meetings in their community and teaching others, but some kind of a call to action so that you're developing those new constituent leaders who can then work on that issue.
Thank you. And Dr. Castillo, I think throughout this morning and even through this panel, we've heard about funding, particularly school funding. And as the leader of Chandler, you talk and engage with many of your community members. What do you believe is the greatest misperception about public school funding, and what can we do to overcome that?
Generally, the general community, I think there is a perception that we're funded adequately. We just don't spend our money well. We're inefficient. We're not accountable. It's poor job of targeting funds into the classroom, and we're top-heavy. And I think generally the facts are on our side. The challenge is really getting those decision makers to ask probing questions, whether it's about the research. And when Chuck shares that, yes, in one study we're equal or we're paid more than charter schools, but when you do an apples to oranges comparison, we're not. I think in an ideal world where legislators would ask probing questions, also determine what it is they want to have happen, and then determine what it costs. And Common Core is a wonderful example of that. We're revolutionizing the way our teachers teach. No one asks the question, what's it going to cost to retrain a workforce? They're just saying, get it done. So districts are making major cuts, major reductions in order to pay and compensate their teachers to either return on their own time or to fund those substitutes so we can pull them out of class. SACE is another example. That's the Student Information System. My God, we've been arguing about that for years. I don't know why we don't determine what it is we want to do and then say, what's it going to cost and fund it. I think we can also turn the perceptions around by engaging our stakeholders, our communities. We have a very active citizens budget committee. 99% of the time, when you can pull in even a naysayer or an anti-public school funding person, you can turn them around when you can get them to look at the facts, open the books, the budgets are there, and determine for themselves that there isn't a whole lot of waste there. There isn't a lot of fat. I find it interesting also that we talk about classroom funding. I find that marvelous, in a snide way, I guess. Rather than talk about how many dollars we want to go in the classroom, why don't we talk about what services the community or the legislators or the citizens want us to stop providing? Should we stop counselors, eliminate social workers, all of whom aren't included in the classroom dollars? Health services, should we not have nurses and health assistants? Well, let's let our grounds and facilities go to waste and not hire the maintenance and grounds departments. So I guess, to wrap it up, I wish the questions we were asking were phrased differently. And then go from a logical perspective. And I have an unscheduled public announcement. This is my band.
No, they're still coming to Tempe Union. We know Chandler Unified's a wonderful school district, but we're in
Tell him
competition.
what
Go ahead.
I told him if he sent buses in Chandler,
She had bond money and she'd buy
I
20
would
buses and
unleash
send them
the
into Tempe.
fleet. So, no. I really would ask those of you that are here today, and I think Spencer Elliott mentioned it, that wonderful young student early on. He said you need quality teachers to produce quality students. I think one of the saddest parts for me, and I've been in the business a really long time, the unintended result is with education bashing and the continuous reduction in funds. By the way, Arizona took the largest reduction since the 2008 recession than any other state, is the inability of their continuing challenge to attract the brightest and best into this profession. It's right now districts where we almost get into fisticuffs over a physics teacher, a science teacher, the best and brightest math, your special ed people. And it's hard to attract them to a profession where you start making $35,000 or $36,000, and it may take you 15 to 20 years to get to a $60,000 salary. That's pretty sad. And it's not because I think you're top heavy. I think studies will show that compared to business, public schools are really pretty efficient when it comes to management and leadership. So.
And thank you. And I'm going to just continue that thought. And the reason why I'm doing that is because we kid at each other about, competing for kids and who's going to get this kid or that kid. But as community leaders, you need to know that the superintendent's up here. You should be very proud of them. Because every conversation I have with them, including my competitor, if you want to call it that, is we don't care where those kids go as long as they get a good quality education. And if Chandler can provide that, wonderful. If we can provide that, wonderful. Because we know that strengthens our community. And we know it is about communities. So with that in mind, Councilmember Arredondo Savage, you've been a board member. I just learned softball coach. Business person, you're a member of the Tempe City Council, and I'm going to ask you for your different perspective in terms of the funding. You talk a lot with the community, you're out there engaged with them, and if it's something that is different than what Dr. Castile mentioned, what do you feel upon your conversations with community members are their biggest misperceptions about public school funding?
Well, first, I just have to say, I am very proud to be part of this community. I mean, I too am a Tempe native and thrilled that we have a community that embraces education like we do. And I'm happy to be a part of that. But I think on a different note, with my experiences in the school board and being on the city council, it's kind of similar in the sense of people's perception is you have one big pot of money and you can do whatever you want with that pot of money. And that is just not the case. There's a lot of different rules and regulations when it comes to the dollars that the school districts receive. You have your capital money, your soft capital money, and if you were, and also your operating budget. And I think if you were in the earlier session with Chuck, it was very informative, and I really do appreciate having that information. And I think Dr. Castile mentioned it a little bit, but there is also accountability. I mean, everybody just thinks that there's just money and you can do whatever you want with it, but that is not necessarily the case. I mean, there are rules and regulations of how that money is spent, and there are audits at the end of the year to ensure those dollars are going where they're intended to go. And I don't think as a community we understand that. And I think the reason sometimes we don't understand it is it's complicated. It is really complicated, and I can go and listen to that class, I don't even know how many times, and I learn something new every single time. So we continue, I see, our teachers, our administrators always doing more with less. And I think it's the same in a lot of different groups and organizations, and that's why it's great to be part of this community. Somebody mentioned it earlier about those students of what they said, and Melissa mentioned about having she named all those teachers. She named all those people that were very influential within her school. And then you have Spencer, who talked about extracurricular activities. And to me, that's when our community can come in, to fill those gaps that the school districts are struggling to be able to fill because they just don't have the dollars to be able to do those things that can make a child's educational experience successful. Whether it's being in a group of kids that have the same skills that they do, maybe it's just having an influence in somebody within the community that comes and mentors them or teaches them how to read in a third grade. That's how you can really make a difference. And that's why this community is so great and so unique. And I don't think we're where we want to be. There's always room to grow. And I could talk about it forever because I feel like I kind of can see both sides. But it's exciting, and it's great that you guys are here. And just know that, when it comes to the misperceptions, I know these school districts are doing everything that they can. And because you're here, you want to do everything that you can too, to make sure every single one of our children, no matter where they go, whether it's private, charter, or a public school, that they have a quality education and they're successful in their life.
Thank you. Now we have a few minutes left. And if I had prepared them for this, they would never have sat up here. So I will take the grief that they're probably going to give me in just a moment. But you have your experts up here, and you may have some questions that I didn't ask that you would like answered. So if any members of the audience which wishes to ask a question of any members of the panel, we'll open it up to you at this point in time. Dr. Garcia?
My question is around funding. You said the funding has gone down statewide. There's been a type of funding, and that funding is really related to extracurricular that actually has increased, and that is tax credit. I would argue that the state has shifted their responsibility to individuals paying tax credits for the extracurricular activities. You can explain how they work, by the way. But part of this is I can give my dollars to my daughter's club, which means my daughter has an opportunity to do them and other children may not. So to me, I think the question is how much of this have we shifted from the state to individual taxpayers so that they are making up for the difference that the state is paying?
And maybe this is how I can answer it, so I'm taking one for the team. And who benefits? Who benefits?
Well, my daughter.
Your daughter benefits, but overall, when we look at where those tax dollars go and who really receives more in tax dollar donations, are the schools that one would consider in poverty-rich districts.
No, absolutely, no question at all. And you all know those numbers. You know that the tax credits in some areas get a lot more than others. I would argue we're okay with those numbers. We know they exist. I'm able to. Other parents are not. But again, that shifts the state's responsibility for the things that Spencer was talking about down to individual parents rather than the collective.
I think your point is well taken. So what basically you're saying is the state kind of abdicates its responsibility through saying, well, we offer this program. This is an opportunity. And I've never been a fan of tax credit, because it doesn't help me fund the things that I need to fund in my school district. It does help individual families, so that's a nice thing. But from a perspective of pardon me?
All
No, not all. Some, and but it doesn't help me really with what I need. So, frankly, I don't think that is a very viable way to help us do what we need to do.
But if we were to go to the legislature to increase funding and put it in a tax credit, it would get approved.
That's the unfortunate
One of the
thing.
challenges with tax credits, you're funding to help your child. Now, some of the monies, if it's in the general tax credit fund that the principal manages, they may send all the kids on a field trip, whatever. The state is really funding it. So you're giving us $400, you're getting your $400 back. And it is targeted assistance to your particular child, but that's just that much less funding that can be spread out over all the children. So.
But I would submit there's a new law that also allows you to get a tax credit for a private school. And so a parent can ask for your tax credit to be contributed to my child, so it will help defray the expense of my child's tuition at this private school. And so what you say, Camille, is true. That reduces the amount of funding available for the collective or for district schools. But I also would say, David, you're exactly right, but it's a political legislative issue. And as long as this community and others say, that's okay with us, I don't mind because we just observed this from a group in Scottsdale where a family has their child in a private school. It was going to be expensive for them, so they wrote letters to probably a half dozen of their friends to say, please give us your tax credit so that I don't have to pay for my child in private school. As long as that's okay with us, that's going to happen. The only way that's going to change is if people pick up the phone and call their legislator. Now, I don't know how many business people are in this room right here, but your voice is hugely important. And so whoever is in here as a business has got to be the champion for this issue. And I suspect there are fewer than a half, or maybe even fewer than a third, are business people. But when you do this the next time, every one of you need to go out and bring in 2 or 3 others of your business friends to be in this room in this conversation, because that's the only way that's going to change, is if there's a kind of an advocacy in local communities that we're not going to take it anymore.
And part of that, I think, is the purpose of this, is to be informed so that you can go out, influence, and activate based on the information you have today. Mitzi, did you have something?
Yeah, so I've unanimously heard Common Core standards are going to be fantastic. They are changing the way we teach. And it's not just where some teachers might have been wonderful using these ideas in the past. Now, all Arizona's teachers will use them. The Common Core standards, yay. Testing, not so much. So my question is, what are you doing to, on one hand, implement Common Core standards and make sure their teaching improves, but not go crazy any more than we are on testing our kids? Because I'm getting a lot of pushback from parents about the over-testing.
You know, if we think of testing as an event, then it really is an obsolete way of working with our students. And I think that's how we have traditionally thought of it. It's an event that happens in May. Some of us refer to AIMS as an autopsy because it's what happened. It's not what you're doing now. So in the Kyrene School District, what we're doing is completely transforming our assessment system so that it's something that goes on throughout the course of the year. So students, families, and teachers have information on an ongoing basis about how the students are doing, and we can adjust based on that information. And in that way, it's not an event. It's part of the instructional process. So really testing, assessment is just part of teaching and learning. It's not a separate kind of entity, and then with what the state's doing, and I think this is lost on a lot of people, we are not replacing AIMS with another AIMS-like test. We're replacing it with a more ongoing system like I was just describing that we're developing locally. I don't know exactly how it's going to roll out, but I'm hearing it's about 2 or 3 times a year that we'll be collecting that data before the end of the year. Then there will be some kind of summative measure at the end of the year. So I think it's going to be a much better system. And besides that, it's not like a multiple choice, choose the correct answer game like we used to play. It's more like solve the problem and show your work so that you know that the child is actually learned, what it is you're assessing. So it's a very different way of looking at things. And if we look at it that way, I think it'll be something that we really value. It'll be more meaningful.
And
Dr. Starr, thanks, because you talked about exactly where my question was going. You talked about in your session the transformations, and the whole theme of community was really strong here today, but one of the things I don't think we're getting across to parents with this Common Core, they don't understand it, they don't know where it's going, so they're afraid of it, right? But my thinking is when a parent goes to talk to their kid, because that's the only way they see it, what do they see? How are you getting the message across that what we're doing in the classroom now is really changing? Because if you look through the door, it looks the same as it did when I was a student, right? But what are we really doing? One of the things you talked about was we need to move away from maybe age-based education, right? So how do we do that? Get the words out to the parents, basically get them to buy in so they're a part of the community, they want to be a part of it, and they're engaged as well.
It does. I'm going to let my peers, I think we need to do a better job, frankly, in inviting the community in. That's part of what this is today. If we could do this with our entire community of, 40,000 parents, that would be the ideal. So somehow we need to figure out how to get more people involved. But do you want to comment on that?
Wait, before you pass the mic, because you brought it,
Shoot.
the real question was, so if you're
Trying to get rid of it.
If you're moving away from age-based education in that respect, the assessment has to be a huge piece of it. And when is that going to happen? When is that going to happen consistently, starting in K and all the way through? So you can really get a baseline to where those things and how do you
that's can't answer that in like 2 seconds. But what I would say is there are obstacles in our way of making the transformation we know we need to make. I've had conversations with John Huppenthal about, if we have really good ideas on what we want to change and we can prove that it will work, would you give us a waiver so we could do that particular thing? And he appears to be open to this, and so we need to continue to have more conversations because I do think there are obstacles that prevent us from having the transformation we're trying to have. But beyond that, I'll ask either of my counterparts.
I will respond to your first question about letting parents know. We're having really, really good luck in Tempe Elementary in our schools where we're conducting data curriculum nights throughout the year with our parents. And so we bring our parents in, we talk to them about this quarter, what are the things, what are the standards, what are the different components of what their child will be learning, give them tools to help support that learning at home, and at the same time talk to them about the data with the assessments that are being done. And we're finding that that's so much more meaningful for parents than throwing everyone in a room and saying, okay, this year this is what you're covering for all of first grade or eighth grade. And our parents are really, really engaged. We provide childcare so that they can sit uninterrupted and really listen and then ask good questions about how can I help my child with math? Or if I'm not strong in math myself, and my kid is taking pre-algebra in sixth grade, what are the resources I have to help support that learning? And I think those, when you bring it down to back to the classroom level and really engaging parents in meaningful dialogue about their child's education in almost an individual way, then our parents really understand. And many of our parents, some of our parents had bad experiences in school, and they're not going to show up at a forum like this. But when they come to their child's classroom and can ask those questions, then they're more engaged in their child's education.
And before we turn it over to Mrs. Carlson, it goes back to those relationships because who the parents connect to more than any of us is that classroom teacher. And they know their child better than any of us do. And if we can facilitate and allow for those relationships to develop, that's how the communication can be facilitated.
But I just wanted to say for those of who don't know is that the State Board of Education has adopted a transition plan to move from the Ames assessment to the PARC or whatever this assessment will be. So for the next couple of years, the Ames test will remain as the assessment. Then there's going to be a blended couple of years where some kids who started with Ames will be tested on Ames, but the park will be introduced, and then after, I think, 4 or 5 years, then the park, or whatever that test will be in place. So there is a plan in place for that. The only other thing I would add would be that employers have parents as employees in their systems. So while some parents can be accessed through parent-teacher conferences or at sites, businesses can also invite in organizations like ABEC to sit down with employees on a brown bag lunch kind of approach and do a presentation on Common Core, what it means for education, and what it means for the workforce. I encourage you to invite ABEC to do that. So that's a mechanism that's available also.
Mr. McManus?
Yeah, and just one other quick point, maybe to echo what Superintendent Bush said, or Superintendent Bach, is that it doesn't necessarily happen through messaging. Messaging can be important when it comes to getting an override passed or in a real short term, needing to get the word out, but it has to happen through formation, formation of parents, engagement, the relationships that are built, so there's some ownership over what's going on at the district or what's going on in their child's school, that it's not just here's a top-down message that's being delivered to us, but there's some real ownership at the community level.
And I would love for us to continue the conversations and your questions, but maybe we conclude this panel discussion by just going down the line or taking turns in terms of, if there was one thing that you would like for us all to walk away from based on today, what would that be?
I'll start. The community must be involved. They must be engaged at a deeper level than coming to a meeting. I would encourage educators to identify what they really need to have happen. What would they like to have from their community members or their business partners in order to help move the needle on achieving the Common Core? And then go to those business partners and say, here's what we need. We need to have trained tutors in grade 2 to make sure that kids are reading on grade level by 3rd grade. We need to have career exploration in middle school because there's no funding available for career exploration in middle school for our elementary schools. We need to have assistance from the business community to fill out the ECAP, the Education Current Action Plan, when kids get to high school. Business community can help in every single one of those categories, and I'm hoping that dialogue occurs.
I guess I'd go back to my last comment, is as many in the business community, you all have long-term strategic plans and you have a vision of where you want to go. And I contend that to get where we want to go, we have to have the best and brightest in this profession. And I think we ought to develop the plan as how do we recruit them and entice them to become educators, because I think it's absolutely critical. I would submit to you, in the elementary schools in particular, we have a severe shortage of men. And our turnover in the first 5 years is pretty awful. People want to make a living, and the requirements and expectations that we have for the educators, I think we need to compensate them, train them, and support them. And that's going to take some money.
I think the last point I would make is when we're organizing or engaging community members, and we've got a number of them sitting in the back from Valley Interfaith Project, we talk about something called a research action, where you're in a conversation or involved in a relationship where you're helping to learn and turn a problem into an issue. I think today, hopefully for all of us, is some kind of a research action. And it's not learning for our own sake of learning. It's how do you take that information and what you learned today to engage others, to stir other people into action, to have new conversations. So whether it's in your business relationships, in your school relationships, or in the community, how do you take what you learned today and get other people engaged and involved in this type of work?
I'm going to take just a little bit different angle here, in the sense of, say, everything that is happening here, everything that happens in our education system is so important to the success of a community. I think the one thing that I've really learned being on the city council is how important education is to economic development. And when we are out there working with new businesses that want to relocate here, or businesses that want to expand here, the quality of education that is within the community is critical to their decision making. And it's not only just the quality education that's provided, but it's also the skills, the quality of the workforce that is coming from our education system, and the quantity. And we've been really lucky as a city of Tempe. I feel very fortunate to be part of this community, because we've been able to, during very difficult times, to attract different businesses that have been here. I mean, Silicon Valley Bank was really great. One of the reasons why they came here was because of the quality workforce that was here. And to me, that is everything that you guys are doing. And maybe there's some other really big business that may be landing close to the lake. And that's another reason why they're going to be here, is because of the quality workforce that we're able to provide in this community. And that's, to me, that's the work of everybody in this room, and it doesn't happen by ourselves. And I think as a city, we too need to get engaged, just like the businesses do, to ensure that our students, wherever they may be, are receiving that quality education, because that's what makes the community successful.
It seems like there's a lot of common ground with this topic, and so no matter who you talk to, there are mutual interests that we all share. And so I would encourage us to not be afraid to have the difficult conversations with our friends and neighbors who may not immediately agree with our point of view when it comes to talking about funding or Common Core, whatever it is. I know in my own family, what we tend to do is avoid talking about certain things that we disagree on, which is not a good model for that, and I think a lot of people do that. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to bring up politics at Thanksgiving dinner because we know that's going to turn into a huge, not pleasant experience. So the other piece of this is really, seek to understand the truth. And when you get something via social media, and it sounds good, and maybe it sounds like something you should, believe, do your homework and find out, where did that come from? What data did they use? Who provided that data? Because I think oftentimes we can dispel myths that really, aren't worthy of our attention. We certainly have big problems to deal with, and we don't need to waste our time on things that aren't even real. And I see a lot of people paying attention to things that they're not grounded in any fact. It's just kind of some urban myth that someone's trying to perpetuate, and you have whole groups of people then that start spending time and energy on something that doesn't deserve time and energy. So those would be some things that I would want to say.
I would want to say that failure is not discriminatory. We have children who live in poverty, who don't see hope for their future. We have children from very high socioeconomic backgrounds with lots of parent support and every resource you could find, who have lost their way. They see no meaning in their lives or in their learning. And it's now becoming a moral imperative. I call it a moral imperative. Many people more gifted than I have called it a moral imperative to our society. Because there's no more important or critical work that we do than educate our children. And unlike many other countries, we educate all our children. And our moral imperative is to make sure that every single child who we touch gets where they want to go and has a meaningful life, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Because there are many children, some of our highest dropout rates are our kids who come from very successful families who see no purpose in the learning that they achieve. So to our community and our constituents and our business community, it's our moral imperative. It's one of our great crises, I believe, in this country or in this state, because we're failing many children and we have to do something about it.
And I guess I'll conclude with this. If there's anything we can take from this, is business and community leaders, you need us. And fellow educators, we need you. And rather than turning against one another, let's turn to one another to say, what can we do together as a community to improve the opportunities for all of our kids? I say this and sometimes people laugh. You don't have to. I know who's going to be paying into my Social Security when I retire. And those are the people that I want to make sure have every single opportunity to be prosperous, not just economically, morally, socially responsible citizens, because that's the crux of our nation and that's what makes us successful. Thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it over to say some concluding remarks to Kathleen Barton. And thank you to our panel. If you could give them a round of applause.
Thank you. So I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch. So first of all, let me thank you again for spending the morning with us, and hopefully you will also talk with some of the folks who started out the morning and had to leave throughout the day. I know that there was a lot of collegial conversations going on. Our intention with this was to take the conversations that the Tempe Kyrene Business Advisory Council gets to have together and build on that information and that sense of collaboration and bring it to a larger audience, because we very much realized that the issues and the challenges and the opportunities that are in front of us really do require a much more extensive leadership commitment than we really have in practice today. I happen to think we're at an inflection point for a lot of different reasons. And part of it is kind of being in crisis mode. I mean, oftentimes we rise to a challenge when we are at or really close to that. We think about things differently. We think about the greater good. It may sound a little Pollyanna-ish, but I think, I forget who said something about don't let a good crisis go to waste. I think there are incredibly good intentions and opportunities, issues notwithstanding for us. Our goal today was to try to share some information, engage you both in the conversations and Q&A sessions today, also in the evaluation forms that I'm hoping that you are filling out for us. This is a way for us to figure out what worked today, what else you need, what else you want us to do, so that we can figure out how, as an entity, we become much more outstretched and into the community, and hopefully with many of you. I think that this is kind of a first step of bringing a distributed leadership table to the buffet table. We talked about that this morning, and we will hopefully hear what else you want on the buffet table, either more of what's already been on there or new things that you want us to add, so that we can think about increasing the information we share, increasing the engagement and the activation of a much broader distributed leadership community. I take away some of the other comments too. It is a time for us to be out of the box or in a different box or not in a box at all. I'm not sure what it is. Dr. Schauer talked about that. And I would suspect there's not a person in the room that doesn't agree that there is nothing more important for us than to educate our kids for all of the reasons that we have talked about today. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really step outside of the issues and the challenges and outside of how we actually educate today and think about who educates our kids, how we educate, how we bring the talent into the field we want, and how we actually think about even different models of education going forward that will support the personal goals and aspirations of our kids, the economic vibrancy that we want in Arizona, the personal prosperity and the shared prosperity. So I'm hoping that this is just your first trip to the buffet table. I want to thank you again for coming. I want to thank my colleague, Ed Tobin, who is more than my sidekick and shares the responsibility of the co-chairing the Tempe Kyrene Business Advisory Council, the members that are here today, the staff from 3 districts that continues to support the work that we do, the 4 superintendents, all of the community leaders, the panelists, and the presenters today. So thank you very, very much.